Has anyone ever accused you of being too emotional just to dismiss your pain?
I still remember that Thanksgiving like it was yesterday, the kind of family gathering that starts with forced smiles and ends with you questioning why you even bothered showing up. My name is Emily Harper, and at 42, I thought maybe this year would be different. I'd loaded my two kids, 10-year-old Alex and 8-year-old Lily, into our old SUV and driven the 2 hours from Columbus to my parents' place in suburban Ohio. The air was crisp, leaves crunching under our tires as we pulled up to the house that looked the same as always, white siding, wraparound porch, and that flagpole Dad insisted on flying even when the wind whipped it ragged. I wanted normalcy for the kids, you know? A chance for them to feel like part of something bigger than our little apartment and my part-time accounting gigs that barely cover the rent since the divorce. We walked in, the smell of roasting turkey hitting us like a warm hug mixed with obligation. Mom, Susan, was in the kitchen, apron tied tight, stirring gravy with that nervous energy she gets around holidays. Dad, Robert, held court in the living room, remote in hand, grumbling about football scores. And there was Karen, my older sister by 3 years, perched at the dining table like she owned it, her twin boys, 12-year-old Jake and Josh, bouncing around her with their endless energy. Karen's life was the picture of success, married to a lawyer, house in the suburbs of Chicago, vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. Me? I'm the one who got the short end, always have been, but I told myself to let it go for the kids' sake. Dinner started okay enough. Plates clattered, wine poured, stories swapped about work and school. But then came the kids' turn. Mom called them to the table first, and Jake and Josh charged in, grabbing seconds before anyone else even started. Alex and Lily hung back, polite as I'd taught them, waiting for their cue. That's when Dad waved them off. "Let the boys eat," he said, his voice gruff like it was no big deal. "Emily's kids can wait." Karen chuckled, passing the mashed potatoes to her sons. Mom handed Alex and Lily empty plates, murmuring something about saving room for pie, and pointed to the corner bench by the window, the one with the lumpy cushions that no one ever sits on. My kids shuffled over, sitting quietly, their little legs dangling, eyes fixed on those blank plates like they were waiting for a miracle. The room filled with laughter as Jake knocked over his milk and everyone made jokes about boys being boys. Karen leaned toward me, her smirk sharp as a knife. "Get used to it, Em. You were born to live off what's left." Her words landed soft, but cut deep, the kind of sibling jab that's been sharpened over decades. Dad nodded along, fork midway to his mouth. "They need to learn their place. Builds character." I felt heat rise in my cheeks, the unfairness twisting in my gut like bad food. Alex glanced at me, his face pale, and Lily fiddled with her napkin, not saying a word. Everyone else dug in, turkey carved thick, stuffing steaming, cranberry sauce glistening, while my kids sat there, forgotten in the corner. The chatter swelled, Karen bragging about the boys' soccer league, Dad reminiscing about his hardware store days when money flowed easier for her future than mine. No one noticed the silence from our side, or if they did, it was just another laugh line. Something snapped inside me then, quiet but final. I didn't yell or make a scene, that's not my style, and it would have just fed their narrative of me as the dramatic one. Instead, I set my napkin down, reached for Alex's hand, small and warm in mine, and then Lily's. "We're leaving," I said, voice steady, though my heart hammered. They looked up, confused but trusting, and we stood as one. Karen's eyebrow arched, Dad paused mid-bite, but no one stopped us. We slipped out the back door into the cooling evening, the screen slapping shut behind us like a period at the end of a sentence. In the car, I buckled them in, Lily asking softly if Grandma was mad, Alex staring out the window at the house lights fading. I drove away slow, hands tight on the wheel, tears stinging but held back. Relief washed over me. This was freedom, right? No more pretending. But minutes later, as we merged onto the highway, my phone rang. It was Mom, her voice shrill over the line. "Emily, come back. Something's wrong, the kitchen's on fire." Everyone's screaming. Sirens wailed in the background, close and chaotic, shaking the whole neighborhood. What had we left behind? And why did it feel like my quiet exit had lit the match? That frantic call from Mom had me pulling over onto the highway shoulder, my SUV's tires crunching gravel as I gripped the phone tighter than necessary. Her words tumbling out in a rush about flames, licking up the kitchen curtains, and everyone scrambling for the back door, while Dad yelled orders like he was directing traffic in a war zone. The whole scene turning their perfect Thanksgiving into a smoky disaster that had fire trucks lighting up the neighborhood like a bad movie set. Alex and Lily leaned forward from the back seat, their faces a mix of worry and that wide-eyed curiosity kids get when real life edges too close to their video game adventures, asking if Grandma's house was gone forever or if we could go back for pie. But I shushed them gently and promised we'd sort it out later, my mind already spinning with a cocktail of relief that no one was hurt and this guilty undercurrent wondering if my walking out had somehow triggered the chaos, though deep down I knew it was just their own carelessness boiling over after years of treating us like the unwanted guests at their feast of favoritism. We made it home to our modest apartment in Columbus that night, the kind of place with creaky floors and a kitchen that fits all three of us if we don't mind bumping elbows, where I whipped up grilled cheese sandwiches with tomato soup from the can. The simple meal tasting like victory as the kids chattered about school friends and forgot the empty plates drama. But sleep evaded me as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling cracks that mapped out my frustrations like a roadmap to nowhere, replaying Karen's smirk and Dad's cold decree about our place in the family hierarchy that had roots digging deeper than that one dinner, stretching back to my childhood when the scales tipped so obviously in her favor that it became the unspoken rule of our household. I remembered summers at the lake house Dad bought on a whim after his hardware store started turning profits, how Karen got the shiny new bike with streamers while I pedaled an old rusty hand-me-down that squeaked louder than my complaints. Or Christmases where her gifts wrapped in fancy paper included the latest dollhouse complete with tiny furniture, and mine was a puzzle missing half the pieces. Mom always whispering that it built resilience, but really just papering over Dad's belief that Karen was the one destined for big things, the golden girl who aced tests and charmed everyone while I stumbled through with average grades and a stubborn streak that earned me lectures about knowing my limits instead of encouragement to push them. Those memories flooded back as I scrolled through my phone in the dim lamplight, the fire news trickling in via local alerts showing photos of our family home with hoses snaking across the lawn and neighbors in robes gawking. No injuries, but plenty of drama that had Karen posting passive-aggressive updates on her social media about ungrateful relatives ruining holidays. Her words veiled enough to sting without admitting fault, and something in me, that quiet fire I'd banked for too long, decided it was time for a little payback that wouldn't require face-to-face confrontation, but would still land like a well-aimed dart. The next morning, after dropping the kids at school with hugs and promises of normalcy, I sat at my laptop in the quiet living room, coffee steaming beside me as I crafted a post for our extended family group chat on Facebook. The one that's mostly dormant except for birthday wishes and Karen's brag reels, describing in humorous detail how some family dinners leave you with more than indigestion, like a reminder that not all plates get filled equally, especially when the cooks play favorites. With the portions, attaching a candid shot I'd taken on the sly of Alex and Lily's empty plates stacked in the corner like a sad still life, the caption adding a wry twist about how crumbs build character, or so they say, but I'd rather build my own table. It wasn't outright vicious, just clever enough to highlight the hypocrisy without naming names, and by midday the notifications buzzed like angry bees. Cousins chiming in with sympathetic likes and one aunt even messaging privately about how she'd seen the same favoritism play out at reunions, the subtle support making me chuckle over my lunch salad because for once, the spotlight swung my way and Karen's perfect image cracked just a hair under the weight of public scrutiny. But the petty satisfaction soured that afternoon when an unknown number flashed on my screen during a break at work, the voice on the other end gravelly and familiar in a distant way, like Uncle Ted, who Dad hadn't spoken to in years after some business fallout. Muttering quickly about how the favoritism wasn't random, but tied to debts older than you think, and the real reason they pushed me aside to protect Karen's spot, his words cutting off abruptly with a click that left me frozen in the office break room, staring at my reflection in the microwave door as questions piled up like unpaid bills, debts from what, and why whisper it now after the fire turned our exit into a spectacle. I spent the evening sifting through old emails and photos on my computer, piecing together fragments of family history like a puzzle with missing edges. From Dad's store closing under mysterious circumstances to Karen's sudden college fund that appeared out of nowhere. The patterns emerging like shadows lengthening at dusk and stirring this uncertainty that maybe my kids and I weren't just collateral in their sibling rivalry game, but pawns in something bigger, something that explained the cold shoulders and smirks as more than jealousy. As bedtime rolled around and I read to Lily about brave explorers charting unknown territories, my phone lit up with a text from Dad, his words blunt and accusatory. "What did you do, Emily? This sabotage ends now, or you'll regret starting a war you can't win." The threat hung there, chilling the room's warmth and leaving me wondering if Uncle Ted's call was the spark or just the smoke before the real blaze ignited, pulling me deeper into a family tangle I thought I'd escaped for good. Dad's threatening text glowed on my phone screen like a warning flare in the dead of night, pulling me from a fitful sleep where dreams twisted the fire into metaphors for our family's burning resentments. And by morning I was wide awake with a resolve that mixed equal parts fear and fury, deciding that ignoring him wouldn't make the shadows go away, but facing them head-on might illuminate whatever Uncle Ted hinted at with his cryptic call about old debts protecting Karen's pedestal at my expense. I spent the day at work distracted, my accounting spreadsheets blurring as my mind replayed fragments of conversations from years past, like the time Dad sold off family heirlooms to fund Karen's wedding without a word to me about my own modest ceremony. Or how Mom always deflected questions about the store's collapse by praising Karen's business savvy that supposedly saved the day, patterns that now screamed cover-up rather than coincidence and left me questioning if my kids' empty plates were just the latest symptom of a deeper illness rotting the family core. After picking up Alex and Lily from school, we stopped at the local library on the way home, the kind of quiet haven with worn armchairs and stacks of forgotten history books that felt like a safe, neutral ground away from the chaos, where I let the kids browse picture books about adventures while I pulled out my laptop to dig into public records online, searching for traces of Dad's hardware store bankruptcy from 2 decades ago and uncovering grainy articles about unpaid suppliers and a sudden infusion of cash that propped it up briefly before the final shutdown, the details vague but pointing to loans from unnamed sources that smelled like favors traded in backrooms rather than legitimate bailouts. It built this gnawing uncertainty in my chest, the kind that makes you second-guess every holiday toast and birthday card, wondering how much of Karen's success was built on foundations I'd been kept blind to, and that afternoon over juice boxes at a park bench, I confided just a little to the kids about family not always being fair but us sticking together like glue, their innocent nods frustrating me because here I was, a grown woman hesitating to cut ties completely for fear of robbing them of grandparents, even toxic ones, a choice that would probably make listeners shake their heads at my soft spot. Thinking why drag it out when the evidence of favoritism piled higher than Dad's old debts? But loyalty dies hard, especially when Mom called mid-evening, her voice quivering over the speaker as she begged me to come check on the house repairs, promising no lectures, just a chance to talk like sisters and daughters should, and against my better judgment I agreed. Driving over the next day with the kids in tow under the pretense of a quick visit that stretched into an afternoon of sifting through the damage in the kitchen where black smudges marred the walls like accusations and the air still carried a faint char smell that clung to everything. Mom and I worked side by side sorting singed photos from a drawer, her hands shaking as she shared snippets about the fire starting from a forgotten burner right after our exit, blaming stress from the dinner tension, but avoiding Dad and Karen's roles. And in a moment of quiet, I pulled out the printout from my library search, holding it up casually as if it were just interesting trivia about the store's heyday, watching her eyes widen before she busied herself with a frame, muttering about how some things were best left buried to keep peace. That was my mini revenge, subtle and sharp like a paper cut, dropping the hint without demanding answers, forcing her to stew in the implications while I withheld the full weight of what I'd uncovered. A witty withholding that left her glancing at me sideways with newfound wariness, but it unearthed more than I bargained for when she let slip during cleanup about a shoebox of old letters and dads. Study that might explain the special arrangements for Karen's future, her words trailing off as if she'd said too much and confirming Uncle Ted's whispers about hidden money tied to the store's shady end. The discovery twisted the knife deeper, painting Karen not just as the favored one but possibly complicit in whatever financial maneuvering kept her afloat while I scraped by, and as we wrapped up with hugs that felt obligatory. Mom pressed a faded envelope into my hand from that very box, its seal unbroken and addressed to Dad from a lawyer, the paper crisp with secrets that promised to unravel the favoritism into something criminal, or at least deeply unfair. Driving home with the envelope burning in my glove compartment, I felt the conflict swell like a storm on the horizon, torn between opening it alone and confronting the family outright. The kids chattering obliviously in the back about a school project on family trees that now struck me as ironic, and that internal debate raged through dinner and bedtime stories, my hesitation to act decisively probably earning eye rolls from anyone following along because why hold back when the clues screamed for exposure? But as twilight faded and I finally slit the envelope under my desk lamp, the contents spilling out in typed legalese about a trust fund divided unevenly, Karen's share bloated with investment notes, while mine was a token gesture labeled for personal development. A sharp knock echoed at the door, jolting me upright to see Karen's silhouette through the peephole, her face thunderous and uninvited, ready to unleash whatever threats she'd brewed up in the wake of my subtle pokes and the fire's fallout. Karen's furious pounding on my apartment door that evening sent a jolt through me sharper than the revelations in the lawyer's envelope, still spread across my kitchen table like a deck of cards waiting to be played. Her silhouette backlit by the hallway bulb turning her into a looming shadow of entitlement as I hesitated with my hand on the knob, weighing the risk of letting her in versus the storm she'd brew outside, where neighbors might overhear and add fuel to the family gossip fire that had already singed our holiday to ashes. I cracked the door just enough to see her face, flushed and framed by that perfect bob haircut she pays a fortune for, her eyes narrowing as she pushed past without invitation, heels clicking on my linoleum like judgments on my simpler life, launching into a tirade about how my little library detective work and that envelope Mom slipped me were crossing lines into betrayal territory, her voice rising with accusations that I was always the jealous underachiever trying to drag her down from the pedestal Dad built with his blood, sweat, and whatever shady deals kept the store afloat long enough to fund her path, while mine forked into dead-end jobs and a divorce that left me piecing together stability from scraps. Alex and Lily peeked from their bedroom doorway, pajamas rumpled and faces curious until I shooed them back with a quick story time promise. The interruption buying me seconds to steady my breath and respond not with anger, but a calm dissection of the trust fund details I'd just read, pointing out how her bloated share came at the expense of mine labeled dismissively for basic needs, the words hanging between us like smoke from their kitchen blaze, and forcing her to stutter denials that rang hollow even to her own ears, her smirk from dinner replaced by a flicker of unease that almost made me feel sorry for her, almost, because underneath the sisterly bond frayed to threads was the truth that her success had always cast my struggles in sharper relief, making my kids' empty plates feel like echoes of every opportunity denied. She stormed out after 20 minutes of circling the same arguments, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows and leaving me with a headache and a resolve to push back smarter, not harder. So the next day during my lunch break at the office, surrounded by the hum of copiers and coffee machines, I turned to an unlikely ally by dialing Mark, my ex-husband whose flakiness had contributed to our split but whose lingering contacts in legal circles might decode the envelope's legalese. Without me forking over fees I couldn't spare, a choice that twisted my gut because reaching out to him felt like backsliding into old dependencies when I'd sworn independence for myself and the kids. The kind of questionable decision that would likely frustrate anyone listening and rooting for my clean break, thinking why invite a ghost from your past when the living family's ghosts are trouble enough? Mark answered on the third ring, his voice warm with that salesman charm he used to sell hardware before jumping ship to Pittsburgh Consulting, and over a hurried call I sketched the basics of the trust fund disparity without spilling family dirt. His advice centering on anonymous tips to estate forums where folks dissected similar inequities, the conversation stretching longer than planned as he probed for details on the fire and Karen's visit, stirring a reluctant nostalgia that made me hang up questioning if I was seeking help or just human connection in the isolation of this unraveling saga. Emboldened by his nudge, I crafted my mini revenge that evening from the couch with the kids doing homework nearby, logging into a local community Facebook group for Ohio families navigating inheritances, and posting an anonymized tale of sibling shares gone sour, weaving in humorous asides about how some relatives treat portions like a buffet line where favorites load up first and others get the wilted salad, attaching redacted snippets from the envelope that blurred names but highlighted the unfair splits. The post gaining traction overnight with comments from strangers sharing war stories of parental biases that mirrored my own, and even a few shares to broader networks. The witty veil of storytelling shaming the system without direct fingers pointed, yet landing blows on Karen's facade as I imagined her scrolling in panic. The growing conflict crested over the weekend when Mom orchestrated a reconciliation lunch at a nondescript diner off the interstate, the vinyl booths sticky and the air thick with fry grease as Dad brooded over his coffee. Karen picking at her salad with forced smiles for the twins who fidgeted with crayons, and Uncle Ted, the voice from the call, sliding into the seat across from me unannounced like he'd been summoned by the tension humming louder than the jukebox, his weathered face cracking a rare grin as he passed small talk about the weather before leaning in during a bathroom break to confirm the envelope's authenticity tied to Dad's store scandal involving bounced checks and a bailout loan from Ted's own pocket that Karen had repaid through favors he wouldn't specify. The alliance felt precarious, his eyes darting to ensure we weren't overheard, and it deepened the uncertainty swirling around the table where Dad grilled me on the online buzz without admitting fault, Karen's glares promising payback. My hesitation to spill Ted's insights frustrating even me because why hold cards close when the game was rigged from the start, opting instead for neutral deflections that kept peace but bottled the storm? As the meal wrapped with awkward hugs and promises of future talks that rang false, Ted pulled me aside in the parking lot under the overcast sky, pressing a folded document into my palm. A yellowed codicil to the will scribbled in Dad's hand that amended the trust in my favor under conditions of silence about the store's irregularities, the paper trembling slightly in the wind and hinting at layers of deception that could topple Karen's world if exposed, leaving me staring at my car keys as sirens wailed faintly in the distance, wondering if this was the damning key to the screams and fire or just another thread pulling me toward a reckoning I wasn't sure I wanted to unleash. Uncle Ted's codicil burned a hole in my pocket all the way home from that tense diner lunch, its handwritten clauses outlining how Dad had secretly earmarked a substantial slice of the remaining estate for me, not out of sudden fairness, but as hush money to bury the store's embezzlement scandal where he'd skimmed supplier funds to cover personal debts, with Karen stepping in as the fixer by forging documents to shift blame and secure a bailout that painted her as the savior while I remained the oblivious outsider, the revelation hitting like a freight train because it reframed every smirk, every empty plate, and every cold dismissal as calculated moves to keep their secrets intact and me in the dark. My kids' humiliation at dinner just another layer in a facade crumbling under the weight of decades-old lies. I tucked the paper away in my desk drawer that night, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the fridge and Lily's soft breathing from her room, but sleep wouldn't come as I paced the living room floor, the conflict raging inside like a civil war between the part of me craving justice for Alex and Lily's sake and the lingering daughter who dreaded shattering Mom's fragile world or turning the twins against their parents. A hesitation that would surely frustrate anyone piecing this together because why pause on the brink when the evidence screamed for daylight, opting instead for more late-night calls to Mark where his steady analysis of the codicil's loopholes offered clarity laced with his own regrets about our failed marriage, his voice over the line pulling confessions from me about how the favoritism echoed the ways he'd once prioritized his career over us, making the alliance feel like a double-edged sword that mended old wounds while sharpening new ones. The days blurred into a tense standoff, family texts pinging with Mom's pleas for unity and Karen's veiled barbs about my meddling, escalating the online chatter I'd sparked, her attempts to downplay the posts backfiring as more relatives messaged me privately with stories of Dad's shady dealings from the store days. Subtle clues like faded receipts Ted had slipped in with the codicil confirming Karen's role in the cover-up and tying the Thanksgiving fire to her distracted rage after our walkout. She'd left the burner on in a fit, nearly torching the evidence of their past along with the turkey, a detail Mom finally admitted in a tearful voicemail that played on loop in my head as I weighed the moral quagmire of exposure. My questionable choice to delay hit a low during a school event for the kids where I spotted Karen's twins in the crowd, their innocent faces stirring a pang of sympathy that stalled my hand, thinking maybe the cycle could break without full demolition. But that softness only fueled the growing storm when Dad collapsed 2 days later from what the hospital called stress-induced angina, the news pulling me back to the family home under fluorescent waiting room lights where Karen hovered like a guard dog, accusing me of poisoning the well with my anonymous forum tales that had trickled into local news snippets about inheritance disputes, her voice cracking with a vulnerability that humanized her for a split second before hardening into threats of legal action if I didn't back off. I played the concerned sister, offering coffee and small talk that masked my turmoil, but in the sterile quiet of Dad's room as he dozed with monitors beeping steadily, he woke briefly to mumble an apology tangled with conditions about family loyalty above all, his eyes pleading in a way that cracked my resolve further and left me slipping out to the study alone, the room still bearing fire scars like badges of their recklessness. Rifling through the false drawer Ted had mentioned, I unearthed the original will and a ledger of forged entries proving Karen's complicity in the embezzlement, the pages yellowed and incriminating enough to unravel everything if leaked, the discovery flooding me with a potent mix of vindication and sorrow because this wasn't just about money, but the souls starved in corners while others feasted on illusions of perfection. For the ultimate revenge, I chose clever subtlety over spectacle, scanning the documents that midnight in my apartment with the kids asleep, composing an anonymous email to the same local paper that had covered the fire, framing it as a tip on unresolved business fraud from the hardware store era, with attachments redacted just enough to protect innocence, but expose the core rot. The send button clicking like a lock snapping shut and sending ripples I could only imagine as the story broke the next morning in hushed online editions that named no one outright, but detailed the discrepancies with quotes from concerned sources that echoed Ted's whispers. The fallout hit swift, Dad's hospital stay extended with questions from authorities, Karen's husband pulling back on joint ventures as whispers of audits circled, the twin school friends' parents raising eyebrows at soccer practices, and we stayed clear, opting for a quiet park picnic with homemade pie that tasted of true gratitude, Alex and Lily laughing freely without the shadow of favoritism. But as we packed up under a setting sun, my phone buzzed with an unknown number, a distorted voice, perhaps Ted or even Karen, warning that the truth's exposure came at a cost, sirens wailing again in some distant part of town like echoes of the fire, leaving me to wonder in the ambiguity of it all if my silence at dinner had been the true spark of their undoing or if revenge, no matter how witty and measured, just traded one set of crumbs for another, questioning forever what place forgiveness holds when the family's place was never truly ours to claim.